Hello and welcome to my channel. My name's Brian if you're new around here, and for returning subscribers, welcome back, Soul Nation. For watching today's video, you unlock the coveted title of Hearts of Vana'diel. Hopefully you enjoy that title and rep it with pride in the comments of any future video that I post here. The choice is up to you. Guys, today we're talking into part 2 of Yosuke Saito's interview regarding Final Fantasy XI might never be surpassed as an online video game. This is what we're going to do. If you guys haven't seen part 1, you're curious, I'll include a link to the card for that video itself. Thanks for checking out that video, and hopefully you guys enjoy this one as well. If you do, like, favorite, subscribe, and share. Otherwise, you can always hit that dislike button. That way it kind of gives me a good gauge of what kind of content you're enjoying the most here on YouTube. Links to everything as we cover will be in the description, so that way you can go read it for yourself if you don't want to have my narration and thoughts as we dive into it. We are building up, if you guys don't know, to something big. I'm going to put quotes around that in next year as Final Fantasy XI enters its 20th year of service and celebrates its 20th anniversary. They say they've been working on something big for several years. We'll have to find out what that is here in the future. You can always speculate in the comments. But right now, I don't think any of us really truly know, but we all have hopes and dreams. And that's something we'll hopefully be talking about in a future video here on the channel as well. The thrill that Final Fantasy XI might never be surpassed. When Final Fantasy XI launched in 2002, Mr. Saito was working on Maiden Quest and Crossgate, both of which were online titles. Were there any reasons why you focused in on online games? And they say Maiden Quest was an online role-playing game that began July 2001, where players gave directions to their characters using the web browser, and the results could be delivered via email. In 2002, the game was renamed to Vana'diel Quest after scenario expansions and platform changes. It concluded service in March 2017. Crossgate is a massive multiplayer online role-playing game, an MMORPG that began July 2001, and the game was available in Japan, Taiwan, Korea, and China as of 2021. The game is currently in service in Taiwan and China. Saito says, at the time I was playing Diablo like a maniac, and I also was playing Ultima Online, but I was really enjoying and engrossed in Diablo. There weren't fixes or fixed rates for network services back then, so my parents' home received an obscene telephone bill. So I also had a similar experience. And are you talking about the first Diablo? Yeah, it was the very first one. I was brand new, and my first computer I purchased for myself was a Mac. But it wasn't because I wanted to design stuff. It was because I wanted to play Diablo. I remember that none of the stores nearby had it, but a fellow nerd from a different industry told me of a certain store that had it, and I went to a shady shop with imported games to purchase it. It wasn't until later that the distributor stepped in and made a proper English version available in Japan. That's right, I think that the store I bought from was a private importer. Do you want to make online games for yourself because of Diablo's influence? Yes, it has its root in PC games, but at the time my department for PC games had gone, and there wasn't even a business model for them. It was still a little early for online games to emerge in the market, so hurdles were still set quite high. I imagine you struggled a ton. It was certainly troublesome, but it was something I wanted to do, so I wasn't really a pain. Much of Crossgate's format has changed since its release almost 20 years ago, and it's currently only in service in China and Taiwan, but it's still thriving as an IP. And the nice part about making Crossgate is that when the younger audience that were playing the game back then have grown up and taken fairly important positions in Chinese game companies, and they tell me, I grew up playing your games, Mr. Saito. Perhaps I am more widely known in China than Japan. The Japanese market for online games was still in its early days back then, and your decision to sell your games overseas really showed your tenacity. Unlike today, where there are all sorts of barriers to entry, when it came to online games, first of all, it's the PC game, so that there was the fearsome barrier of relying on your customers to browse PC game realtors. Although there were already many excellent PC games at the time, quite a lot of people were under the impression that PC games were mainly for adult games, and there was also the fact that the internet access wasn't as widespread as it is now. How did you perceive Final Fantasy XI's launch in 2002 under the circumstances? At any rate, it was fun, even if your entire party was incapacitated. As a developer, did you feel any jealousy? Oh, I was absolutely jealous. I was simply impressed that they could take and make something like it. After almost 20 years, it may have not kept up with modern trends, but the world is immersive. immense. And cities are immense, and the game properly conveys the presence of the other people in the world, and the atmosphere and the music match perfectly. The game is obviously fun because there's other people, but the somewhat challenging aspects of the game are also part of what makes it so wonderful. In some ways, I feel that it remains so memorable because it was so challenging. Now, as a developer, it makes you very happy to hear those words. You wake up early in the morning to recruit your party members, then finally depart in the afternoon, but wipe out moments after reaching the leveling area. You manage to call for help, but the rescuer arrives with a train of pursuing monsters, and they end up incapacitated in the same spot. When EXP farms turned out disastrous like that, even that was part of the fun. That's maybe if it happens over and over again, like it really depends on who you're with. At that time, there's been times where, like, I remember that's the first time I quit Final Fantasy XI. I had a long work day. I get home, I can finally play 11, and I spend 6 hours playing, and we just died, and I leveled down, and I was like, I made negative progress today. I made negative progress. That was not fun. It's fun to remember it, but man, at the time I wasn't too happy. I'd love to know if you guys had any moments like that when playing 11. So it's not as if we intended to make the game challenging. During the planning phase, we received a directive to make a job take roughly 6 months to fully level. We estimated that the average player would play a bunch during the weekends and end up with about 14 hours per week, while the hardcore player was estimated to play around 40 hours per week. Surely it's the truly hardcore player played well beyond 40 hours per week, but our estimates were already had hardcore players and more than this 3 times the amount of playtime compared to the average player. So if you were to take the hardcore players 6 months to level, the average player would require almost a year and a half to fully level a job. We started off with something like, I played so much, but my XP bar hasn't even budged, in which it was gradually softened to the level of players won't be able to keep up unless we toned this down this much. So in our minds, we thought we had toned it down considerably. Some players at the time said that the XP loss was quite strict, but we had nothing that we could really draw comparisons to. The older games were generally strict even outside of online games, and considering that, it didn't seem all that strange to me. Of course, leveling was difficult, but I was okay with it since it was fun. I don't mean to sound like a particular NPC, but if you really didn't like it, you would have quit. However, waiting for the H&Ms, the high-level notorious monsters, defied common sense. That was the only thing I felt completely out of my reach. However, I thought it was viable as one avenue of endgame content, and that I'm sure that there were players who enjoyed rivalries over H&Ms, so that it was my opinion that that sort of feature was necessary as well. But I personally stayed away from it out of fear that my work life would be over if I tried to get into H&Ms. So even Mr. Saito stayed away from H&Ms? As someone who was working on them, I also feel that it was something that I personally wouldn't be able to do. For those of us who squeezed in their playtime between getting home from work and going to bed, it was quite tough to get into. H&Ms have quite a wide spawn window after all. That was also where the recruit and the trial of error. If the time frame was too wide, players wouldn't be able to hunt down specific targets. If it was too narrow, it would be farmed endlessly by a limited number of groups. And I believe that we had the result of trying to designate a time frame where anyone could have a chance. The spawn window for King Behemoth and other H&Ms were superb. So on release, King Behemoth had a chance to appear instead of Behemoth after 72 hours or more, since it was the last defeated. Behemoth itself reappeared 21 hours to 24 hours after being defeated. So other H&Ms worked on a similar manner, including Finir, Nidhogg, Animentois, and Aspalabadabadu. Cannot say that. When I happened to be in Quiffum Island, when people mentioned King Behemoth was spawning, soon I would go and speculate that the whole area would be littered with bodies. Seeing that spectacle was fun too. When King Behemoth used Meteor, everyone in the vicinity was affected regardless of whether they claimed it or not. So even spectators were burnt to a crisp. Exactly. You can't just sit there and watch. Mr. Saito, from the developer's perspective, were there any game systems or operations where you felt Final Fantasy XI excelled or even missed the mark? There weren't many things that I felt that had missed the mark back then and I was playing. Personally, even waiting for parties, it felt like a part of my life in vana'diel, and I was on the side of the people and they were okay with it. But for people who had limited time to play, I get that the feeling may have been a bit better if it were a little bit of an automated matchmaking system to allow them to play more casually. The problem with automated matchmaking systems tends to be that when it groups people up, it is kind of the lowest common denominator. One of the things that we see with like pre-made groups is that you put so much time into, there's already like this cost, so you're more willing to work with somebody. When you get automatically matched with somebody, it ends up being like, let's just kick them and let's find somebody else. And so there is a community cost to that aspect, and I think that technology can solve that gap. I think technology can make up that gap in the long run. We're just not there yet, so we'll have to wait and see. I've talked about it in a couple other videos, guys. Just check the, like, if you're interested, check the coffee chat playlist for more information on that. All right, nowadays Final Fantasy XI also puts effort into making the game quite more casually enjoyable, but in the past perhaps we made parties too much of a prerequisite. I don't know, I really enjoyed that aspect, and I think again, like, technology can kind of solve for that problem, but maybe that's not for this video. let's focus here on the information, and we'll have an opinion. We can talk about that down the road if you guys want. All right. Also, I feel that modern games don't have the same thrill as 11 when it comes to exploring new areas. 11 had aspects that might be criticized for being too strong or too difficult, and may not have been considered acceptable by today's standards of game balance. But those aspects also contributed to the thrill, and in which I saw that the exquisite balance was as I was playing. Oh, I guess that's not really from the perspective of a developer, but it was truly a lot of fun as a player, and I keep getting derailed in that direction. No, thank you. By thrilling aspects, you're referring to areas like Ifrit's Cauldron. Oh, that was a very scary place. Bombs would fly at you from nowhere, and as soon as you use magic, so casting Invisible Sneak is a matter of life and death. Well, it was not an issue if you were not stingy about using items. If you were alone and you were attacked, there was almost no chance of surviving. I also played Beastmaster, so I remember that area with the Wyvern NMs scrolling around. Strolling. Either way. Are you talking about Kafka Tunnel? That's where Gurivir was always taking a stroll. That's the one I remember. These moments in Kafka Tunnel, where I'd be looking for a place to farm, and I'd hear that these heavy footprints, and I nearly fearfully clung to the wall and prayed that I didn't come near, or if someone else was getting attacked, I looked at the opportunity to run past them. It was quite common to get attacked while you were leveling there. Since there was no way a leveling party could stand up to it, you'd have no choice but to get crushed. Gurvir was interesting as a game mechanic. Nowadays, being unable to safely level in one spot in a game where camping is the norm would probably be criticized. I agree, that's still part of the reason why there may be never another experience that surpasses 11 in thrill. Would you say that losing XP when getting incapacitated is one such factor? I feel like it's not only the system-related aspects like that, but also the world's atmosphere and music, and a combination of all sorts of elements. So you're saying that the thrill isn't just from being afraid to lose XP, but also the excitement and enjoyment of the adventure. Now I'm going to kind of weigh in on this because 14 actually introduced an interesting concept in Bosha, that's latest kind of adventuring foray, kind of zone, that older style zone of kind of forcing people together in certain ways. And what they did was, like, you have like your medal, or aka your experience, and that can go down. But once you kind of hit these kind of like milestones, like your levels, you actually kind of keep that level. So honestly, at the end of the day, you can level backwards. You can, lose enough metal, and then to get to the next level, you have to make up that loss, but you still don't lose that progress. So in my case, I remember hitting, I think it was like level 30, getting like a whole new set of gear, and I was looking so good. I was like so excited for this, and then unfortunately leveling down and literally not being able to equip any of my new gear, not having enough money to get that gear. I sold my previous set. I was so confident. It was a lesson. It was a hard-fought lesson that I learned that day. Anyway. I feel like it's not only system-related aspects of this, but the world's atmosphere, music combination, and all those sorts of elements. There was an activity that players challenged themselves to reach Juno at level 1, which would be extremely difficult if you weren't familiar with the world. But as you level up, you gain more freedom to go to other areas, and you gain more knowledge as the player, and that fears of inhibiting you at lower levels are gradually dispersed until a point where you're capable of activities like going to Juno at level 1. There are fears in which can be overcome as both the character and player progress, which give the sense that they are living in the world of vana'diel. With Final Fantasy XI reaching its 20th anniversary in May 2022, what do you think has contributed to this to its longevity? I would attribute the hard work of Mr. Matsui to the development team. As someone who creates online games, we want to keep our games going as long as there is even one player still playing, but continuing to operate a profit loss is frowned upon as business practices that doesn't make anyone happy. I think Final Fantasy XI is blessed from the prospect standpoint, and it's well balanced to remain in operation, and I'm very impressed when I consider how hard staff members must be working to maintain that. Half of that is due to the efforts of our remaining developers, but I think the other half is because staff members who began the project were truly amazed. While we certainly can't compare to modern games, it's truly grateful that they created graphics that we can still be used 20 years later. MMORPGs are said to take around 3 to 4 years to produce, but Final Fantasy XI was in development almost half that time, and it's amazing that they were able to develop something of this quality in that short period. Nowadays, there's a very high development cost to creating 3D models, lighting, and other settings that have to be adjusted at very minute levels. But on the other hand, it's difficult for a modern AAA title to do well if it doesn't have the kind of things, considering what Final Fantasy XI might have created the perfect timing. 3D models were still kind of blocky during the PlayStation era, but the PS2 was able to handle more polygons and detailed textures, and I believe that the fact that Final Fantasy XI was created at a time when people were still on the skill to convoy shadows and volume using those textures played a big role. The polygon count is drastically lower than 3D models in modern games, but the character models still have a defined presence. So while there isn't a strict definition of AAA title, it refers to basically large-scale development. So I like these little definitions in here. There's obviously some elements that feel outdated, but I believe Final Fantasy XI graphics are wonderful. I'm sure the designers were capable of creating models with even more detail, but we wanted to simultaneously display as many characters on screen as possible, so the polygon count and texture size per character were limited. The designers felt our need to reduce memory sizes as much as possible while retaining quality, which has me truly impressed even to this day. And the third part of this interview will drop on August the 18th, so you can expect that video from me either around that time or hopefully not too much further after. Guys, I'd love to know what you guys think about this interview, what's going on in the world of Final Fantasy XI, and hopefully we all get something to be excited about here in 2022. It's crazy to think that we're going to be celebrating 20 years of vana'diel, Final Fantasy XI, and more. I'm really enjoying these interviews. I think there's so much insight to be gathered from them, and hopefully you guys are as well. Thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for being here. Let me know what stood out to you most in this interview itself, and I hope to see you in my next video and other content. I was going to say interview in this regards, but again, I say thank you. Awesome. Have a fantastic day. Just putting out awesome words. Blueberry, pineapple. If you made it this far in the video, sign off with pineapple or blueberry. What's your favorite fruit? Let's go, guys. We're going to wrap up. Thanks for watching. Have an awesome day, and I'll see you next time. Until then, take care.